Okay, good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
I'm going to introduce myself. The cameraman is going to have to swivel with me. All right. I'm being recorded here, so those that are missing out, they will have an opportunity to observe it through DVD or digital. Well, I'm going to introduce myself in my language, and then I'm going to get into what I'm going to present. Wabshkim and this is it, Mr. Tem, Nishnakaz, Bijuni Dodem, Ishkunaning Donji, Treaty 2 Territory, Nishnabe Soto Nin. I introduce myself in Anishinaabe Moin as White Spotted Horse. I'm of the Lynx clan. I'm from Skowhenan First Nation of Treaty 2, which is in the Parkland region, the Interlake. And I'm Anishinaabe Soto. Now, my people grew up with a very strong history connected to the French nation. In fact, it goes all the way back to 1609. When they came and visited us at Sault Ste. Marie, and they met the people of the Falls. And they called us Sauteurs. And we are forever known as Soto as we move into this area. And I took our places along the lakes. But we're called many things, not just Soto, but Ojibwe is most common, which is still accurate. And especially those historically that came up the Red River from the south, that was invited by the Cree to come and live here, live off the bowl of our common bowl of our people. There's plenty to share. So we came up as Soto up Thunder Bay, along Saging, and then we went along the lakes. So there was two major migration groups for my people. But wherever we went, we were named by different explorers. So we were Ojibwa, Chippewa, and many other names. I'm giving you a lot of sense of history here. But we are invited to this place by the Cree Nation. There are 7 indigenous groups in the province of Manitoba. I mentioned 2. Can you name me 5 more? No, can you? Because that's Dakota, Dene. We said Ojibwe Cree. Actually, in the northwest of Manitoba, put those 2 groups together, Oji Cree. 5. 2 more. Sioux. Well, it was Dakota. We don't say Sioux anymore. You blame the Ojibwe on that. Yeah. When the French were exploring, he says, who's in the west? Nana do so. Those are the snakes. Well, we were in conflict with each other for over 200 years, so we had name calling. But historically, people write down Sioux people. So it's not correct. It's actually Dakota. So we're missing. We're missing 2 way up north. We said Dene, right? Dene, Inuit. 7. Oh no, we're missing 1 major one too. Michif is their language. Métis Nation. No, that was referring to many names. So just to recap. Just to honor not just those that live in Treaty 1, but just to honor those that live in Manitoba. And that is the Dakota, the Ojibwe, the Métis, the Cree, the Dene, the Inuit, and Oji Cree. There are 87 language groups. Now name me 80 more. No, I'm not going to let you do that. It'll take up all half an hour. I only got 50 minutes. But there are 500 nations throughout North America. Historically, there are 57 languages alone just across Canada. And they've been here a long time. I, the Anishinaabe, Anishinaabe means this: from whence the male species was lowered. Sounds familiar? An Adam story? But we were lowered on the earth. We are very ancient. We got linguist experts that studied our language, and they says it's an ancient language, at least 50,000 years old when it comes to ancient languages of the world. And then they went and tried to look for it, because the theory was we came from Asia, Mongolia, I guess. But you know, they can't find common words that connects. They just can't. But our oral history is strong. We talk about events way before the Ice Age. Way before the Ice Age. We have oral history. We have storytelling. We tell stories about origin of things, like how did the bison have its hump? It has a big hump. We have stories. The one that I always refer to comes from the time of the Ice Age, when they connected a sled to a dog. Yeah, the dog's ancestor is the wolf. But one time they domesticated the dog, and he says, why not put a sled to it? This is the time of the Ice Age. Because the story there was, how did that one bird become bald? Now we use animals as a means to remember stories, so these are taught to children. That's oral tradition. It is taught by generations after generations, but when you have animals, then you remember. Did you know there was this one bird that went around, annoyed everybody? Goes around, has this big, big feathers, I guess like a peacock, I guess. Look, I guess pretty. Goes around, don't I look so good? Now, they bothered all the other animals. Don't I look so good? Don't you want to have the same kind of thing that I have? Well, one day, went to the wrong animal. It was the grumpy old bear. So by the time he approached the grumpy old bear, he was just about to say the words, hey, don't I look so? And then that bear grabbed that little, looked at that bird, and he put it up his caboose. Pulled that out, threw it on the ground, and walked away. Now, poor bird was stunned to say the least. But forever on, that bird is bald. Didn't have that beautiful stuff, that feathers. You know the bird I'm referring to? Oh, no, bald eagle's beautiful, has that beautiful head. The vulture. The vulture. Forever, it can eat rotten meat. After all, if you've been, you know what I mean? Then you can tolerate anything. But that was a Cree story that I heard a few years back. And they speak it in their language. It's so beautiful. It's so funny. Because the language is pure. It loses its magic when you interpret it into English. It just does. I, for one, am a storyteller, so I have to sell it. I have to sell it. But I wanted to share that with you, that Indigenous people's been around for a long time. They found their places through their stories, their connection to land and territories, and they made arrangements to live together with their neighbors. They made treaties. So when they made treaties with each other, that was what was going on when new people came from across the oceans. So it was so natural to go into this type of a relationship. The fur trade is a good example of how these traditional protocols was in place to become not only allies, but to become equals, partners. So along the way, they made treaties. You'll find my stories are a little different than the last one. Yeah, we got people that stayed behind for the second venue. But anyway, I do change my stories every time. There's never one session the same. But I'm here to share with you what is treaty, what is reconciliation, what is relationship. Those are the themes that brought you here to this day, is that you want to go back to the source. What's the spirit and intent to go to a place like Lower Fort Garry, where Treaty 1 and 2 was negotiated? Because we're all trying to learn more when it comes to reconciliation. Reconciliation came from a word that came from the Supreme Court of Justice back in the mid-'80s. One of those justices says, you know, we're going to be fighting this out for a long time. It was a message for all Canadians. It was a message for government at that time was, if you make promises, you should keep it. And the word reconciliation is you have to reconcile your past. You made arrangements to share this country. They shared this country with you. Why are you mistreating them? Nobody's going anywhere. Europeans are going back. First Nations says, I'm going to kick you out. That's not what's going on. All they just want to say is, we want to be respected and be treated as equal. Well, why do we have to fight this out in the courts? So since the 70s, since the Supreme Court of Canada says we're restoring the honor of the Crown, I'll tell you about this timeline that I developed 10 years ago. It's a Canadian story. It's a Canadian history, but it's not common because it has Indigenous history tied to it. I grew up in a system where they don't teach this. Stan, you all know that, eh? We learn everything else, European, United States, Canadian. I'm a more expert of American history than the Americans. But I guess as Canadians we can say that, right? Because we're bombarded by all their media, their history. And part of that history was the Indian Wars, cowboy and Indian movies. You see, they had a history too of treaties. All 50 treaties that they made were broken. It was just the means to round up all the Indian tribes and put them on reservations. And anybody else that was caught off of it were the enemy of the state. So you legally can eliminate them. But that's the John Wayne movies. Now Canadians get all mixed up by saying, oh, that's what we did. We conquered the West like anybody else. But did you know that's not even near what took place? In Canada, history was, there was no wars, no battles. There was no stealing it or going out and squatting on it and just taking over. Everything had to be done through the means of treaties. So people forget that. So they never teach us treaties in schools. The only time I learned anything about treaties was the one thing that they couldn't take away from us, and those were treaty days. They took everything else. But the one thing they were obligated to do was they got to go to my community, and we live in a semi-isolated community, and a lot of times people travel by boat. Later on, we had one road going in. But I remember those representatives from the government in their suits with an RCMP officer in his red serge coming by boat, and we're all waiting. And he's coming off the boat with his briefcase, I guess, and a big book. They do that every year, every June 21. And then we all line up. They have a big table. They have the person that has your name. They have the person that gives you $5. And they have the chief. And then they have the RCMP. And then there are speeches. Then our elders will say how it's so important to understand that we're all treaty. That's the only thing that was an identity that was taught to me as a child. Back then, I look back, I see how symbolic and how strong that symbol is. But when you're 5 years old, $5 is going to give you a lot of candy. These days, I don't know about a Happy Meal McDonald's, but it's still very symbolic. So for us, we were reminded we were treaty people. That's the only thing we had as a history. Now we're celebrating, I represent the Treaty Relations Commission in Manitoba. I'm part of the Speakers Bureau. I've been part of them for 11 years. And we say this, we say this in Manitoba, we say this wherever we go. I understand the new treaty commissioner is going to be coming here today. It's cool, eh? Yeah, female. Cool. Loretta Ross. And we say to everyone we see that we're all treaty people. But Canadians don't understand that because they weren't taught this in schools. So we've been introducing a treaty curriculum in the schools for over 6 years now. I think it's very highly successful because we got a lot of inspirational schools and teachers, but the students themselves, they know more about what I'm presenting here, what little I'm presenting here, including those treaties, than you, this generation. They're more empowered. So what is treaties? Treaties are relationships. But before I can really give you an understanding how strong of an identity treaties is for Indigenous people, is for me to ask you very simple questions. So would you please participate by saying yes, no, or I don't know? All right? Are you ready? You did good with the trivia with the Indigenous groups. Very good. Would you need a grandfather to have life? Yes or no? Sure. You need grandfather for life? All right, okay. What about grandmother? Do you need grandmother for life? Oh yeah, way to go, grandmother. Getting a lot of support. Would you need a father for life, yes or no? Yes. All right, grandmother's still leading. Would you need a mother for life, yes or no? Yes. Oh, universal. Right on, right on. Now I'll make it hard. Would you need a brother to have life, yes or no? Crickets. Would you need a sister to have life, yes or no? Yep. Okay, few for the sister, less for the brother. Now, the reason why I start off with this, maybe, I got a point to make. I always do. Now, for Indigenous groups, and this is many around the world as a common worldview, and maybe some have lost their ways. Maybe some have become civilized and forgotten. But for Indigenous groups that survive in these harsh elements for thousands of years, you have to know these things. And one is grandfather's son, the sun. Grandfather's son. Does the sun give us life, yes or no? Yes. There, see? How? Energy. All of life depends on that sun. Grandmother moon, does she give us life, yes or no? Yeah. How? Hey? Tides. That's right. She's not just a pretty face that visits all the peoples of the world. She has purpose. And 80% of the earth is made of water, and the water needs to be moved. The tides is that if it doesn't happen, then water becomes stagnant, it becomes still, it becomes poison. So life depends on that gravitational pull of the moon. Also, it stabilizes our earth. Without that going on, then the earth is going to be doing this sort of thing. So the moon has purpose, gives us life. Who would be the father in the story? It's not easy, but gives us life just the same. As you think about this, take a deep breath. Air, where does air come from? Well, it's in our atmospheres all around us, right? It comes from the trees, the vegetation, fresh air. But it also keeps look at that, it's raining. Keeps our atmosphere, moisture, cool. It also gives us life by raining, right? But the main purpose of the sky, it has this layer. What is it called? Ozone layer. As a father does, protects us from the harsh solar rays, objects that fly from the heavens. Without that going on, just imagine you will trying to live life in a microwave. Can't be done. So, Father's sky gives us life. Nima Ma'aki, who am I making reference to? Mother Earth, our Mother the Earth. Aki is how we say it. Everything we'll ever need in this life, we depend on the earth. Is it true? Yeah, we're very much connected. You're sitting on chairs that came from the earth. This building, the food that we eat, everything we never need is from the earth. So, she gives us life. They say whatever we do to the earth, we do to ourselves, right? Is it true? Yes. Oh yeah, that's true. I grew up on a reserve. I used to, with my grandfather going out in the lake, I drank directly from the river. Refreshing. Back in the mid-90s, they says, don't do that no more. You'll get sick. Gotta boil your water. It's been that way ever since. So, is it the earth's fault or is it man? Man. Yeah, it is. Who is the brothers and sisters in this story? The animals. That's right. The animal world, the two-leggeds, the four-leggeds, those that swim, those that crawl, those that burrow under the earth, those that fly, and also the trees, the plants, everything out there. Because are we alone? No, we share this earth. Therefore, there are brothers and sisters, just like you are to me. You as a people are my brothers and sisters. You're my relation. So that's what indigenous groups describe their environment, their surroundings, that this is a family. This is a family. We're connected by all of this, we're connected by spirit. We teach it in the schools to this day that everything in life is created by energy. But just imagine 400 years ago, trying to explain that brother bear, sister tree, grandfather rocks, we're all related to all of spirit of life, all of creation of life. And then we're condemned. We're being teased. We're being put down as being childlike, inferior, uncivilized, pagans, savages, Indian. I let the word Indian resonate a little bit more because it still goes on. I don't know why. I don't know why we have racism, but it still goes on. I, for one, as a healer, knows that all you have to do is just educate. If there's fear of the unknown, if there's ignorance of any kind, all you have to do is get to know your neighbor. Get to know the people around you. And maybe that'll help eliminate some of that fear. But we live in society now with that racism is still around. I don't understand this. In our Anishinaabe philosophy, we said that Creator, Manitou Gitagan, Creator's garden, all of creation, all of life was made. This is Creator's garden. Everything was made here has a purpose, is authentic, is original, but it has diversity. It has many colors, has many shapes and sizes, but each is everything that's in Creator's garden was meant to be. This is life. We are not individuals. We are all part of these things. And from indigenous people, there was a clash of values. There was a clash of worldviews between Europeans and indigenous people, even to this day. and yet there was so much common ground. It's just that we just had different languages, different way of describing things. 400 years later, they're now teaching it in the schools. But 400 years ago, we couldn't stick to the common ground. So somebody says, well, I'm going to come around. I said, this garden just needs some changes. Why don't we turn it all gray? Well, it doesn't make sense. Nobody can interfere in the Creator's garden. Aren't we all supposed to benefit from this garden, the land, the air we breathe, the sunshine, everything? It don't make sense to say, let's turn it all into gray. We call that interference. For what purpose? So anyway, I just want to give you a little bit of a fundamental insight, is that it's always about the land now. People fighting over the land. Oil, pipelines, water. I have to get into the treaty history. I got myself on a different road. But I just wanted to say that we are all on a spiritual journey and a spiritual development. One day we'll look at each other without seeing the color of each other, but to see that we're all brothers and sisters. Then it'll be a better world. But did you know in that treaty relationship, all those words were spoken? That we're all going to be family. We're all going to live together and prosper. That we're all part of Creator's garden. Nobody owns the land, but we can share her because we have responsibility to look after her. Every people has land and territory, but they don't say it as owners. They say it is our responsibility to look after her in our area. So there are 87 language groups that says, I am associated by a land or a territory. That's their identity. And when they came to treaties, they said, let's share. Let's share this. That's what you need to understand, because Henry Prince was one of the principal signers of Treaty 1. And he says, we are here to speak for the land. Now, he wasn't speaking as a landowner. He was saying, I have responsibility for her. We have to ensure that she's represented. So, this is a treaty map. Treaty map. There's a lot of symbols here. Supreme Court cases. The green represents treaties. There are 70 historical treaties throughout Canada, and that is what built Canada. 80% of all of Canada has been addressed by a treaty. They're still being negotiated to this day, the 20%. So if you see a treaty map, you're going to see most of Canada has been addressed by a treaty. The ones that have been held out is British Columbia. When they joined the fold of Canada, the Dominion of Canada, they felt they didn't have to make treaties. We were living in a new era called Dominion of Canada, so they choose not to. And yet what was established long time ago in 1763 with the Crown was the Royal Proclamation that essentially outlines the principles that build our laws and our Constitution, but it was the principles of treaties. The Crown recognized that the people are nations that are here, that they have their own governing systems, and that these treaties is as recognized as many other nations in other places of the world, like in Europe. So what they introduced, that you must have a treaty representative from the Crown, must be done in a public place, and you can't just go and take things or start up wars or just go over there and, it's not yours. You have to negotiate. So you have to offer something. The First Nations, what they want is to protect their nationhood and their identity so that their life, their way of life, will not be interfered with. But they see this new relationship as a means to be partners because they had that experience for over 250 years in the fur trade. everybody was partners, everybody was equal. There was a strong relationship. There was a lot of intermarriages, especially with the French. When you have Champlain that started the new colony of Canada, New France, our sons will marry your daughters and will become one people. They said that's what they're going to do. They're going to become a new people of Canada. Did you know that in Montreal this year they're celebrating Canada 375? Yeah. Meanwhile, the rest of Canada 150. Do you feel shortchanged? Well, that's Dominion of Canada. And but the identity of Canada has been around a long time. Canada is an Iroquois word meaning our village. So if you look at, I love that fact because it reminds us that the traditional protocols was in place of intermarriages, but to enrich one village is to have exchange of marriages, exchange of young people. You come and live in a village, you exchange young people so you can learn somebody else's customs and their languages, and they're going to do the same thing. Now, Canada has grown, and it still exists that way. We invite the world to come and live here, to enrich yourselves. We never say give up who you are and give up your identity, but to be part of it. Canada, our village, is still growing. We are still a beacon of opportunities and hope and freedoms to the world. We have a lot to share yet, because even though we're the second largest country of the world, but you got to be reminded that there's a lot of resources. There are over 600 nations out there that are still continuing, says we're still here, we still embrace new peoples. Since I'm on the subject of indigenous languages, what does it mean what Manitoba means? I'll say it out in its full description. Manitoba. Yeah, Manitou means spirit, creation. Manitou, that's half the word. Abi is where the spirit is, or this is where the spirit sits, but this is where it is. So this is where it all was created. In our oral history with all of North America, the heart of all creation, of all these stories is here. So it's always been Lake Manitoba, but people make references to the center of this continent of Turtle Island is here, Manitoba, Cree word. Might as well throw in, what does Winnipeg mean? Yeah, that Red River always looked like that. But there's history here for over 6,000 years, but as the people, they travel by waterways, lakes, they have to identify certain areas and certain regions by the indigenous language groups. Quebec is Iroquois. Anybody know the meaning of Quebec? Which means the narrows. The Gulf of St. Lawrence narrows in. So it's always been known as Quebec. Ontario, anybody want to guess? Clear Lake. Lake Ontario must have been very clear at one time. Saskatchewan. Swift Current. Hey, you've been on the other group there. You got a heads up. Yeah, Saskatchewan River is swift. Alberta, non-Indigenous. British Columbia is still named after a river, the Columbia River, but it was a British colony, so it was British Columbia. Everywhere else is practically was the Northwest Territories, but in those earlier maps they said Anishinaabe Territories. Hey? I didn't hear you. Okay. But the maps to this day, they call it Crown Land. They switched it around. And that's what you have to understand about treaties. it was about sharing. But from the government's perspective, it was about taking. It's about, now I control it. The dominion of Canada. We don't say Dominion of Canada. It was taken off because it was too, I don't know. But in the original form, it was called Dominion of Canada. It was just a reminder that we are now in control of everything. But it wasn't that way. It wasn't meant to be that way. Where am I going with this? It was meant to be shared. You see, those 4 provinces that started off 150 years ago were all in the east, and everything else was the Northwest Territories. So they got together and they say, hey, we want to run our own country. We want to be called the Dominion of Canada. But Queen Victoria reminded his Confederation fathers, he says, we made treaties. We made a lot of historical treaties throughout the land. And they assured her that we're going to abide by the legacy of the Crown. In other words, we'll continue on with that legacy of treaty making. So this treaty making is the foundation of Canada. Without Canada, if there's no treaties, there's no Canada. United States, they had manifest destiny. They only used it as a means for control. But in Canada, it was negotiated peace. And John A. Macdonald had a vision of coast to coast. He was competing against the United States that wanted it all. 4 times throughout this history, because of our treaty relationship, we are allies. We defended Canada 4 separate times. This could have been easily United States of America. Then half of you will be for Trump. Oh, what a scenario. Well, anyway, but what you have here was this, the original Confederation fathers, 33 of them, had a different vision of Indigenous people. They wanted all the land. And they promised British Columbia, if we build a railroad within 10 years, all the way to the Rocky Mountains, would you join us? And they said, sure, we'll join you if you do that. But they have to start making treaties. So they started off in Northwest Territories, Northwest Angle. They met the Ojibwe there. And they says, oh, come back next year. We'll take down what you talked about. So they went to the next place. They came here, to Lower Fort Garry. I forgot to tell you, my English name is Alan Sutherland. I have worked here for 7.5 years as a treaty project officer. I took a year off since May because Canadians want to know more. And I can't do it if I'm stuck in the office over here. So I'm part of the City of Winnipeg's reconciliation, where there are 10,000 employees that need to know this history. But I'm also with other groups, including our own people. Indigenous communities, they don't know their treaties. They don't know who their identity is. They've been interfered with. And a lot of that was through Indian Residential School legacy, which was in existence for 150 years. It has devastating impact that we're still addressing to this day. But the common denominator is we don't know about our common history, especially treaties. So we need to do something about that. So a guy like me, I'm busy. I'm busy out there. Lower Fort Garry, Stone Fort Treaty. Adam Archibald is one of its principal negotiators, along with Wemyss Simpson, who was the treaty commissioner. But he was secondary. Adam Archibald is a childhood friend of John A. Macdonald. He's recognized as one of the 33 Confederation fathers of Canada. He went through all the meetings. So he was our first Lieutenant Governor of Manitoba. He was here already. He says, make a treaty. So he had a template. And he negotiated 9 days over here. And I'll just say this, because it came from him when he addressed the 2,000 people that were here. We are not here to take away who you are, but to give you these gifts and benevolence of the Queen, if you allow settlers to live among you. That was the whole point of it all, to allow others to live with you. There was a treaty here already since 1817, 200 years ago. In fact, they celebrated on June 18. That very fact, so you got Pallister on his bike, I guess. But they did have a commemoration for the principal leader there was Pegwist, protector of Lord Selkirk settlers. And they allowed people to live here from Selkirk to pass the border on Pimina to Portage la Prairie, 2 miles on each side. So that was in effect. Now the question was for over here, they were stuck on how much more land do you want? For 7 days, 7.5 days, they were stuck on that very issue because the First Nation says, we don't own it. We can share it. We don't understand this. Now you want to own it. You want to take it all from us. So they were stuck on this very issue for a long time until they opened it up by saying, what about our children? Because they had schools here. There was a lot of people that was educated along the Red River corridor, like Louis Riel, for instance. The education, they knew how important that was. So they put it in the treaties. Every treaty had education to build a school on our reserves with a schoolmaster. So that was the question. What is there for us? We want our children to know the cunning of the white man. That's a direct quote. What they wanted was their children to prosper with the Canadians on equal footing. And that was education, and that was with schools. That opened up the other promises. What more do you want? Later on, there was all kinds of promises like agriculture because they can't rely on the fur trade anymore. The buffalo was being massacred by the Americans. There was starvation starting to happen. So they asked for help to open up this country. There was this one elder on his very first day after speech that says, I got to go and start supper at 4, well, it was 4 o'clock around that time. That's my guess. People were gathering like this on the west gate. So they had a canopy. You might even see the historical picture of it. And this elder went up and says, I got to go and cook. Went up and planted kisses on the commissioners. And says, I'm glad we're doing this. I'm glad we're all going to live together. We look forward to this. And she went on her way. Everybody else is laughing because she went right up to them and kissed them. But Treaty 1 is the most documented treaty we have in the history of our treaties. Because there are 2 newspaper reporters there. Everybody had journals, diaries, the Hudson Bay Company, the clergy. But the oral tradition is so strong that it was spoken by a few generations of those that were present. They committed 7 young people to commit to memory, word for word, what was spoken. Of all the oral traditions that were spoken on the ground, don't match up what was historically and now to this day called treaty articles. Is this a few pages? A lot of lawyer talk to it. But the oral traditions was about sharing this land. So that's why I was brought in here as a treaty project officer, because Canada was failing in conveying the true story of treaties. And to prove my point, there's a little marker out there, a little plaque, that still they rely on words like surrender and ceded. They're still saying, we bought this from First Nations. That was against the fundamentals understanding that we don't own the land, but we can share it. It wasn't a real estate deal. And the symbols you see is the treaty medal that essentially says, for as long as the sun shines and the grass grows and the water flows, this will be forever. So that's why part of the Treaty Relations Commission's main message to all Manitobans, eventually all of Canada, we're all treaty people. My ancestors that made the Treaty of Treaty 2 signed it at Manitoba Post in Kenniston. They were here. They were part of listening to all the negotiations. So it didn't take 9 days, it's just one day. Just one day. They already knew what's going on. And they immediately signed in 1871 on August 21. August 21. We benefited because we are still going to be nations within this nation of Canada. We're going to have schools. We're going to have economic means like agriculture and such. I'll even get $5 every year. That's another story, very symbolic. But the Canadians became wealthy overnight from 4, 5 provinces, 6 provinces. At the time of the industrial age, agricultural age, Canada expanded its wealth because it had a whole country from coast to coast to coast. It is still wealthy to this day. But how First Nations are treated is what this gap is all about. Started with the Indian Act, separation, segregation, ended up being a 30-year gap. Sheila Fraser is the one that came up with that gap in the last government. She was the Auditor General, reported to Senate twice. He says, as Canadians live, right up there in the Human Rights Index, health, and they raise the bar all the time because we're being healthier and healthier as Canadians. We're number 3. Now, when Indigenous group says, next time, can you apply what's going on around us on reserves? So Canada drops from number 3 to number 63. Because the reality is, we still have an Indian Act, we still have impoverished bands that I am created as a ward of Canada. Because since the British North American Act 150 years ago, that Section 9124 of the Constitution Act gives the federal crown exclusive powers over Indians and their lands, their reserves. There's an Indian Act since 1876. Why? Because Archibald said, we'll share this land. Yours are going to be in a trust fund in the Bank of London when you're ready for it. So he got recalled by his childhood friend. John A. Macdonald says, you gave up too much. So he created the Indian Act and called it band funds. The Indian Act still exists. I'm a ward of Canadians. As long as there's an Indian Act in this country, reconciliation with Indigenous groups, with Indigenous peoples, with Canadians, will not be complete. As we celebrate Canada 150, I say let's. But let's remember the foundation of building Canada was treaties. I, as an Indigenous person, represent First Nations that have been segregated and wasn't included in the party. But I'm a healer, I'm an educator. I help reconciliation by providing education. I celebrate Canada now. I'm going to be an effective ancestors to the 7 generations to come, because that's what I believe. Because I'm doing my part, I'm going to invite all of you to do your part as reconciliation, is to understand, learn from this, but let's build a better Canada. Our ancestors messed up. But we're going to be the ancestors 150 years from now. So I hope Canada 300 is very inclusive and a better society, a better country. And maybe then there won't be no such thing as racism. But anyway, I gotta give you enough room to answer questions. Q&A. So you have any questions?